Zurich Airport, November 2001. Crossair Flight 3597 is one of the few planes left to land.
The commander was flying out of Zurich for the last 20 years, so he was really used to this airport.
Crossair 3597.
The lone controller in the tower tracks the approach.
Approach runway 28 for you.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
But for some reason, the crew can't find the runway.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
And the flight ends in disaster.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? We have a possible emergency and approach.
He collided with a hill, so obviously he was too low.
A terrible mistake sent a passenger jet dangerously off course, killing 24 people. The clues will lead investigators to a trained professional with an astonishing past.
Mayday, Mayday.
Crossair Flight 3597 is cruising at 27,000 feet above Germany. As the autopilot flies the plane, the crew begins reviewing procedures for their landing.
According to the report, the apron and taxiways are wet. Braking action's not specified.
So the friction report is missing?
Indeed.
That usually means they haven't been out to check lately.
Indeed.
It's the last flight of the day on this busy European route. The 660-kilometer journey from Berlin south to Zurich takes only an hour and a half. There are many empty seats on board. A group of 21 passengers never showed up for the flight. Internet entrepreneur Peter Hogenkamp is returning from a business trip in Germany with his partner, Jacqueline Badran.
On that day, we wanted to take the train, but we had to be in Zurich for that opening ceremony of that trade show, so we decided, okay, so we need to go by plane.
I've got to get some sleep.
It had been a very busy day, so we were very tired when we arrived at the airport.
Among the passengers is the girl band Passion Fruit, Germany's answer to the Spice Girls. They're on their way to perform the last show of a concert tour.
I was shocked when suddenly all the passion fruits, all the three of them, were coming over, and they were sitting right in front of us.
Just what I needed.
Flight 3597 is an Avro 146 airliner. It's a British-made jet popular with regional airlines like Crossair. Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz is in command. He's been with the airline for more than 22 years, having served as a pilot and as an instructor.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall. Visibility 3.
First Officer Stefan Lehrer is a newcomer to the airline. He's had his pilot's license for just a year and a half. He was hired by Crossair right out of flight school.
The passion fruits were being quite noisy. They were excited. I think they went from one gig to the other. So they were still in their stage clothes. I said, oh my God, do I really need this? Can I just sleep?
It's probably okay to move.
We decided to move back a few rows and change the side where we were sitting, so we were in a very quiet area then.
Crossair 3597, clear to flight level 160.
The flight is slightly behind schedule. It's due to land in Zurich in less than half an hour.
According to the latest information, we'll be using runway 14.
What kind of approach?
ILS approach.
Okay.
An
Approach
ILS,
course
or Instrument Landing System approach, means the pilots will be guided to the runway by radio signals beamed from the airport.
And a decision altitude of 1,602 feet. Call me 100 above minimums.
Okay, I'll call 100 above minimums.
The plane's sophisticated computers will do most of the work getting them down. At Zurich Airport, the weather is getting worse. It's snowing, and visibility is dropping.
Crossair 3191, turn left heading 150.
In the tower, controllers have started a nightly routine. A supervisor sends out a message notifying crews that runway 14 is being taken out of service because of a controversial new law. Planes landing on runway 14 must fly over Germany on their approach. But people in Germany have long complained about the noise.
Because of the political issue, airplanes had to fly over Switzerland in their final descent to the airport of Zurich for noise reasons. There was no other operational or weather reasons whatsoever. It was purely political.
Switzerland has agreed to shut down runway 14 after 10 p.m. to keep landing planes out of German airspace and use runway 28 instead. The crew hasn't received this information yet. But First Officer Lehrer is familiar with the new rule.
Should I ask if it's still runway 14? It's almost 10 o'clock.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's still 14.
Zurich approach, Crossair 3597. Please confirm the approach in use is the ILS 14.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. It will be a VOR DME. Approach runway 28 for you.
Oh, hell. What next? Okay, fine.
Unlike runway 14 with its sophisticated instrument landing system, runway 28 is not equipped for ILS landings. Instead, it has a less accurate navigational system. It's called VOR DME. A radio beacon sends information to an aircraft about its distance from the runway and whether it's left or right of it. It provides no guidance on the plane's altitude. Pilots would rather not make VOR approaches because they place a greater workload on the flight crew.
He would always prefer an ILS approach because he gets guidance on the approach slope. And he can also use his autopilot to guide him down literally on ground to the runway.
Because of its less precise technology, runway 28 was rarely used for landings before the new noise law.
Okay then, rebriefing for runway 28. That would be chart 13-2.
Now Captain Lutz abandons the ILS approach he was planning and prepares his first officer for the new non-precision approach.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The crew goes over every detail of how they will approach Zurich Airport.
Residingen, Zurich. East 6,000 feet.
There are only a few planes left to land tonight,
3597.
including Flight 3597 and 2 other Crossair flights just ahead of it. As the aircraft approach the runway, controllers need to keep them apart.
Crossair 3597, reduce speed to 180 or less.
Speed 180 or less, Crossair 3597.
Captain Lutz makes the final turn to line his jet up with the runway.
160 knots.
The plane is now in the thick of the heavy weather surrounding Zurich. At the airport, the second last Crossair flight touches down on runway 28. Now, with only flight 3597 to land, the supervisor decides to head home early. The controller handling the aircraft is the only controller left in the tower.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891.
She gets a report from the plane that just landed.
Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
But Captain Lutz knows Zurich Airport well. He continues towards the runway.
Gear down.
The plane begins the final stage of its approach.
Cabin crew, prepare for landing.
Captain Lutz begins slowing the jet and puts it into a steep descent.
Six miles is checked.
Yes.
Flaps 3-3.
Flaps 3-3 selected.
Final check.
Final check. Confirm 3 greens.
Is checked. 116 knots.
The descent gets even steeper.
Full flaps. Set.
Checked.
Flight 3597 is about 3 minutes from the runway. Captain Lutz expects it to come into view any second now.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Passengers prepare themselves for landing.
We were pretty close to the airport, so you think, okay, this is going smoothly, but it was dark and it was snowing, so we couldn't see anything.
In the tower, the controller monitors the flight to make sure it's lined up with the runway.
Crossair 3597, cleared to land, runway 28.
Two 4, the minimum.
2-4.
The flight has hit decision height, 2,400 feet above sea level, 1,000 feet above the ground near Zurich.
Decision height is the minimum height you can descend before you need to decide whether you can see the runway and continue the approach visually, or you have to make a decision to go around.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
500. 500.
Captain Lutz still can't see the runway lights, but knows that the flight ahead of him had the same problem.
400.
He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
They should almost be on top of the runway by now. But for some reason, they still can't see it.
Make a go around.
Crossair 3597.
The crew decides to abort the landing
Go around!
Go around.
and pushes the plane to its limits in an effort to get it to climb. Captain Lutz throttles up his plane's 4 jet engines as he aborts his landing at Zurich Airport. But it's too late. There's not enough time for the engines to get to full power and clear a tree-covered hill suddenly looming dead ahead. Residents of a nearby village witness Flight 3597's final moments.
I was walking down with my dog. All of a sudden I saw that aircraft coming from behind the forest, the little hill. And I thought, oh, it's very low and it's not on the same route as aircrafts normally are coming to land at the airport of Zurich.
The jet clips the treetops.
Suddenly, it was shaking very hard. What's happening? Something is wrong.
Moments later, the aircraft plunges into the hillside.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy?
All of a sudden, the whole sky in the west was getting really orange, like a big fire, like an explosion.
The impact tears the aircraft apart.
The wings broke off and the fuel is in the wings, so the flames really sort of shot inside the plane.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? This is Zurich Tower. We have a possible emergency in approach sector east. I repeat, approach sector east.
Crossair Flight 3597 has crashed near the village of Bassersdorf, northeast of Zurich. Some people have survived the accident, including Peter Hogenkamp and Jacqueline Badran.
I don't have any memory of how we really walked out, because the back was cut off and we were just able to walk out there.
One member of Passion Fruit also survives, but her two bandmates seated just one row ahead of her have been killed.
I thought, you know, when they give you these instructions in the beginning when you get on the plane, how come they never tell you how far you have to run away from a burning plane? Because they never tell you.
Let's get away from here.
So we thought, I don't know, 100 meters.
Within minutes, emergency workers get to the crash site.
Hey! Over here! Over here!
24 of the 33 people on board Flight 3597 are dead, including Captain Lutz and First Officer Stefan Lehrer. Daniel Knecht, an investigator from Switzerland's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, arrives at the scene.
I got the call from our rescue service about 10:30 in the evening. Half an hour later, I was on the accident site. The rear part of the fuselage was quite intact. It was also the region where most of the survivors step out without injury.
For Peter Hogenkamp and his partner, it appears that moving to the rear of the plane saved their lives.
I think it was just good luck. I think it would have been a whole different story if we wouldn't have changed seats. So the passion fruits may have saved their lives.
While rescuers care for the survivors, Knecht and his team survey the crash site. The location of the wreckage far from the airport is of interest to the investigators.
4 kilometers and 50 meters from the runway.
The aircraft was not where he was intended to be. He collided with a hill east of runway 28, so obviously he was too low. And the first question was, why was this aircraft too low?
The black box flight recorders are found in the wreckage. They're in good condition. Investigators are well aware that this is the worst aviation disaster on Swiss territory in over a decade. They're under pressure to find answers fast. While work continues at the crash, a command post is established nearby. Jean Auvernet heads the Swiss Investigation Bureau. He takes charge of the Crossair file.
The public was very anxious about this crash. The media were raising many questions, so we naturally had to open a more in-depth investigation.
The accident happened at the end of a long day for Captain Lutz, but given his background, investigators must consider other causes.
We knew that the captain was very experienced. He had about 17,000 flight hours during his whole career. Flight instructor, flight examiner, within the company for more than 20 years.
The flight recorders are sent to a lab in Paris to extract their data. At the same time, investigators have begun retrieving fragments of wreckage from the crash site. They look for telltale signs of trouble.
The position of switches is very important. Also, if you have some indication panels, for example, with bulbs in it, you can, after a crash, you can analyze the different wires in the bulbs, and then you can determine which, for example, indications or even warnings were active at the moment of the impact.
An investigator comes across an intriguing piece of wreckage. Oil gauges provide information about the oil flowing to the plane's 4 turbofan engines. Curiously, one of them is installed upside down.
This raised a lot of questions for us and for the media. Everyone wanted to know how you could fly a plane with an instrument installed upside down. It wasn't a very important instrument. You could still read it, even if it was installed upside down.
But if this obvious problem was never fixed, what else could be wrong with the plane?
Obviously, there were maintenance issues here. We looked at how the company was doing the maintenance of the planes.
While this review is being launched, investigators study the plane's engines to determine if they were running at the time of the crash. Soil, tree branches, and other debris lodged inside the engines suggest they were.
We checked them out visually, and we saw that the 4 engines were turning in the moment of the accident.
Authorities need to be sure. They will have to check their findings against data from the flight recorders. In the meantime, the location of the crash suggests something may have tragically misled the crew on their descent towards Zurich Airport. Connect focuses on the flight charts they used to plan their approach.
Is the problem with the approach, or is the problem with the aircraft? This kind of question was dominant when we started the investigation.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The approach chart provides pilots with directions to the runway,
Zurich.
details about radio frequencies, as well as altitudes and speed for various stages of the landing. When investigators study an approach chart like the one the crew used, they make a shocking discovery. The chart does not show the hill that the plane hit.
An approach chart is a very important thing, because an indication which is not correct on this approach chart could mislead a crew and so easily make them do something wrong.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall.
A faulty chart would certainly have been a danger to a crew unfamiliar with Zurich Airport. But Lutz had flown in and out of Zurich countless times. He and his first officer were both based in the city.
The commander was flying out of Zurich, I think, for the last 15 to 20 years. So he was really used to this airport.
Investigators conclude that the approach chart, while faulty, could have tripped up some crews, but not this one. Some definitive news finally arrives. The engine data from the black box confirms the observations at the crash site.
We could see quite easily that the engines worked absolutely normally.
Another potential cause of the accident is eliminated from the list: mechanical failure. Investigators now consider a different possibility.
I was covering the approach west position on the night of the accident.
Could air traffic control have somehow mishandled the plane? Investigators study records from the night of the accident and make a disconcerting find. Zurich Airport's control tower was understaffed at the time of the accident.
He left before his shift ended.
The supervisor in the tower went home early, leaving a lone controller to guide Flight 3597 in for its landing.
She was relatively young, and let's say she didn't have that much experience.
Investigators now study transcripts of conversations between that air traffic controller and the flight crew, looking for signs she made a mistake.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. Crossair 3597.
Speed 180 or less.
Crossair 28 for you.
Crossair 3597. Zurich approach. Crossair 3597.
Clear to land.
They find no indication the controller gave the crew faulty instructions. But they do come across the radio call by the pilot of the Crossair flight that landed minutes earlier.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891. Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
That pilot warned of poor conditions on the approach to runway 28.
She had options.
They wonder why the controller didn't shut the runway down. Because of poor visibility, she could have reopened runway 14 in spite of the noise bylaw. This would have allowed the crews to make an instrument approach. But she didn't do that.
Thank you, Crossair 3891. Have a good evening.
It would have been much easier to fly ILS approaches in this kind of weather, regardless of this political issue.
It's suspected that without her supervisor present, the controller lacked the experience to make such an important call.
So it's clear that to make the decision not to allow an approach on runway 28 and instead make it on runway 14 demanded a certain kind of confidence, a certain kind of courage.
However, Captain Lutz also heard the same warning.
28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
Gear down.
He kept going in spite of it. Investigators are now certain that the controller was in no way responsible.
A pilot can always say no. He can always reject the clearance. If he thinks that landing is probably not possible, he is free to reject an approach clearance and ask for a different one.
Jean Auvernet can't understand why Captain Lutz didn't do exactly that. He should have known that he didn't have to make a non-precision approach in bad weather.
When we saw the mistake the pilot had made, we immediately asked ourselves, well, how's it possible? Because for an experienced pilot who was an instructor, this was a really basic mistake.
Auvernet is beginning to wonder if something in Lutz's long career is hiding clues about his behavior on the night of the accident. One by one, investigators are ruling out the possible causes of the crash of Crossair Flight 3597. They hope the answer lies in the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, of the doomed jet. After waiting many days for its data to be sent back from France, they now pore over it carefully, listening for any clues that might explain why the plane was flying so close to the ground, so far from the airport.
ILNAV is engaged.
Authorities get more than they expected. Not only is the CVR complete, but Captain Lutz offers a running commentary on everything he does.
And on inbound track 275. Speed is checked, flaps 18.
It's practically a roadmap to understanding what went on in the cockpit.
Flaps 33.
That's not usual that the pilot flying is talking so much about what he is doing or what he is seeing. And for the investigation, this helped a lot.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Investigators learned that the crew of Flight 3597 was looking for the runway and believed it would soon come into view.
From the CVR, we saw that the commander and also his co-pilot were not feeling some fear or feeling that something was not going as they planned.
But what they didn't know was that the plane was actually 4 miles shy of its target.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
300.
Captain Lutz obviously thought his jet was closer to the runway than it was. Investigators consider the possibility he was misled by his distance measuring equipment, or DME. It's supposed to tell pilots how far they are from the airport.
The DME indication would have given this distance, and then he would have detected immediately that he was below the approach pass.
Perhaps the DME from Flight 3597 was faulty. It's been recovered from the wreckage, but it's impossible to tell what information it gave the pilots. However, there is another way to check whether the instrument was functioning or not.
The DME distance is not recorded on the FDR, but on 2 occasions the pilots mentioned the distance.
6 miles is checked.
Yes.
But was Captain Lutz really 6 miles out from the runway when he made that report? Investigators compare the time Lutz checked his DME with radar data on the aircraft's location at that exact same time. They can see that when Lutz's instruments were telling him he was 6 miles out, that's precisely where he was.
So we knew that the pilots had an indication for the distance available at that time.
An instrument problem can now be crossed off the list as a factor in the crash, which only heightens the mystery.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
If the instrument was working, why did Lutz think he was closer to the runway than he actually was? The answer lies not in what investigators hear on the cockpit voice recorder, but what they don't hear.
I don't see anything after 6 miles.
Do we have ground contact?
Neither pilot read out a DME check after the 6-mile reading.
Yes.
It tells investigators that Lutz wasn't monitoring his vital instrument during the final minutes of his approach. Instead, he was preoccupied with spotting the lights of the runway. That's not what pilots are supposed to do.
The pilot flying is supposed to keep his eyes on the instruments because all the information he needs is there. He only switches to flying by sight when the non-flying pilot says, "Runway in sight." Only then can the captain take his eyes off the instruments and fly by sight because the landing is performed visually. If
Lutz had checked his instruments, he would have known how far from the runway he actually was. But how had he ended up such a long distance from it?
400.
Confirmed 3 greens.
400.
Is checked.
116 knots.
Further analysis of the black box data reveals that Lutz put his plane into a steep descent as it began its final approach to Zurich Airport. But it's readily apparent his approach profile was out of sync with the trajectory laid out in his chart. The approach profile for runway 28 calls for pilots to make a gradual and steady descent, which would bring them to 2,400 feet after they've cleared the hills around Zurich. Then pilots have to level off until they spot the runway. When investigators compare the approach Lutz made with the approach profile he was supposed to follow, they find that his overly steep descent brought him to 2,400 feet well before he cleared the hills. Then he continued to descend until he hit the ground. It's beginning to look like Lutz had violated one of the cardinal rules of flying. Aircraft making non-precision approaches are supposed to level off at minimum descent altitude or safe height until they have the runway in view. This safe height is intended to keep the aircraft above any potential hazards.
It's really a basic error. Every pilot is trained to respect such minimums. Not only with VOR DME approaches, but also with ILS approaches.
But Captain Lutz kept his aircraft in a steep descent without even pausing at 2,400 feet. The logical next question for investigators, could he see the runway or not?
I have ground contact.
We're continuing on.
What does he mean by ground contact?
They need to know if it was even possible for Lutz to see the runway when he reported ground contact. They retrace his steps in a simulator, programmed with the weather he was facing that night.
6 miles from runway, altitude 3,300 feet. 4.8 miles, 2,400 feet. Still no runway in sight.
No, he couldn't see the runway because there was a hill between him and the runway, and at that altitude, there's no way he could see it.
The conclusion? Captain Lutz had clearly violated his minimum descent altitude.
Whether there is flat terrain or hills, minimums are set accordingly, and in no way you can just bust the minimums, whether there's hills or not.
This discovery raises questions not just about Lutz's actions, but his young first officers as well.
2-4, the minimum.
2-4.
We're continuing on.
A first officer should not let his captain breach minimum descent altitudes.
The co-pilot could have said, no, stop, we can't see the runway, we're not descending.
He considered his captain an old pilot with a lot of experience, not making any mistakes. Most probably he was trusting him too much. And also by being submissive, maybe he wouldn't speak up on time, just to keep harmony in the cockpit.
There were no mechanical failures or instrument problems with the plane. Nor was the air traffic controller negligent in any way. But it is now clear that Captain Lutz made a series of catastrophic piloting errors that doomed Flight 3597 and claimed the lives of 24 people. Investigators dig deeper into Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz's flying record to see if there's anything in his long background that could explain why he crashed Flight 3597. What they discover is truly alarming. Lutz applied to flight school when he was 17 years old. He was rejected 3 times because of his lack of education. He finally got his license at the age of 20, but continually failed exams to upgrade due to his inadequate comprehension of navigation systems. Captain Lutz may have had a long career, but it was not a stellar one.
Years of flying and flying hours don't say anything about competence.
For some reason, though, his record as a below-average pilot didn't prevent Crossair from hiring him in 1979.
There was a red line through his career where several incidents happened before and he had missed several checks. Well, he had some limits. But what's hard to understand for me is that they were identified. And decision was made to keep him flying.
Captain Lutz's limited abilities continued in his new job. While commanding a sightseeing tour of the Swiss Alps, he made a navigation error and ended up in Italy. He only realized his mistake when his passengers spotted road signs in Italian. In another incident, he wrecked a $1.5 million aircraft after inadvertently retracting the landing gear while the plane was still on the tarmac. Lutz's failures forced Crossair to fire him as an instructor, but they allowed him to continue flying passenger planes.
I personally do pilot assessments, and he would never have gone through my assessment with a positive recommendation.
Okay, approach course 13.
Investigators wonder why Crossair allowed Lutz to stay on as a pilot if he was not entirely competent. The answer appears to be they may have had little choice. Investigators' first glimpse into the problems at Crossair came after they found the upside-down gauge at the crash site.
We had to check if the employees had received the proper training, if they had the qualifications required for this kind of work.
No glaring maintenance issues were found, but a closer look at Crossair's hiring practices explains why Captain Lutz was allowed to keep flying. The airline may have grown too fast throughout the 80s and 90s.
The company expanded very rapidly, and with that success, it's clear that you have to quickly increase the staff. Office workers, mechanics, that's one thing, but pilots, you have to go out and find them.
In those days, they were desperate for pilots, and somehow no decision was made to lay him off because of his questionable performance during his career.
Captain Lutz's failings caught up with him on November the 24th, 2001.
Make it go around. Go around!
24 people paid with their lives. After the accident report was issued, sweeping changes were made. Swiss aviation authorities had Crossair increase the number of employees overseeing pilots. They also scrutinized other airlines to determine if there were other substandard performers like Lutz.
One thing is for sure that the selection process has improved considerably. And of course, awareness of people's performance during their career was increased considerably.
Crossair went out of existence in 2002. It was folded into the Swiss national carrier.
As Crossair became Swiss, they adopted the previous Swissair selection process. And I can say today, which is already 9 years since, that safety has improved considerably, and also quality of the pilots that are hired by companies like Swiss.
Since the crash of Flight 3597, Zurich's Runway 28 has been upgraded with both an instrument landing system and an automatic warning that alerts controllers when a plane's approach is too low. There has never been another accident involving that runway. But the Crossair tragedy and the circumstances that spawned it isn't an isolated case. Regional airlines have boomed worldwide since the 1980s. Particularly in the United States, where they account for half of all flights and carry 100 million passengers a year. In the rush to fulfill consumer demand for cheap air travel, these airlines often hire less experienced pilots and pay them far lower salaries than their counterparts at major carriers. Some even neglect to test their pilots for basic skills.
There is no such thing as a compulsory pilot assessment before they get hired. Does not exist.
Colgan Air, in February of 2009, one of its planes crashed in Buffalo, New York, killing 50 people. The accident was blamed on the actions of an inexperienced crew. An eerie reminder of the Crossair disaster, it underlined the urgency of improving oversight of smaller carriers.
If you're making a product for a large company and you make a mistake, you may lose part of the market. You may lose some clients. But an airline company can lose a plane, its crew, and passengers. The stakes are very different.
January 2008. The Boeing 777 is the gold standard for commercial aviation. For more than 10 years, the plane has logged 2 million flights without a single major accident.
Clear to land.
But less than 1,000 feet above London's Heathrow Airport, all that changed.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines.
What do you mean?
It's not giving me power.
This can't be happening. I thought if I don't do anything, then everybody will die.
Mayday! Mayday! Speedbird! Speedbird!
Whatever brought down one of the world's most technologically advanced airplanes can't be found at the crash site.
They had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, they had everything there, except the thing that caused it. That had disappeared as if by magic.
Mayday! Mayday!
British Airways Flight 38, a 10.5-hour journey from Beijing to London. Captain Peter Burkill has made this trip many times before.
I was operating that route a lot. It was one of my favourite flights because it was daylight. You could see the views the whole way along the route.
Burkill and First Officer John Coward both have thousands of hours flying the 777 under their belts.
It's a joy to fly. She handles really well. She's got modern equipment. The computers are easy to use. She's got the range, the ability to do short haul as efficiently as long haul.
For these two, as for many pilots, a day on the job consists of sitting in the cockpit for long hours as computers fly the plane. Powered by two massive Rolls-Royce engines, the Boeing 777 is one of the safest planes in the industry. Nick Harris is flying back to London after a business trip to China.
The good thing was it seemed to be that we were coming in early into Heathrow. I was looking forward to getting home to see the family.
Flight 38's destination is Heathrow Airport, one of the busiest international airports in the world. Nestled in the southwest corner of London, it's bordered by the A30 motorway. People who live in the nearby neighborhood of Hounslow are well accustomed to the sound of jets taking off and landing. The area's tightly packed houses come into distant view for British Airways Flight 38. The autopilot is in control as the crew lines up with runway 27 left. As it nears the ground, the plane is buffeted by some high winds.
Just a little turbulence.
It's the first wrinkle in an otherwise smooth journey.
That's not me, that's the auto throttles doing their thing.
We were picking up wind gusts of about 20 to 30 knots, and we were fully aware that the auto throttles would be able to cope with that, so they'd be moving up and down quite a lot.
You might want to keep the autopilot on a little longer than usual, to let the wind calm down.
Will do.
In turbulent weather, the autopilot can make faster adjustments to keep a plane level than the pilots. 1,200 feet above ground.
I'll have to turn that off for now, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.
2 minutes before landing, Coward takes over flying the plane.
You have control?
Just as the two pilots had planned.
I have control.
I had a few seconds to spare before clearance to landing, and I was just tidying up my map charts.
Speedbird 38, prepare to land 27 left.
Cleared to land 27 left, Speedbird 38.
I remember looking out to see if our gate was available.
500 feet. 500 feet.
Stable?
Well, sort of.
Suddenly, there's a problem.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines. It's not giving me power. What's going on?
What do you mean? I was looking at the engine instruments and they didn't make sense to me because we were asking for full power, but the engine instruments were not giving us any power at all.
What's going on? What?
Flight 38 is crippled in the worst way imaginable.
Well, it looks like we have double engine failure.
With neither engine providing enough power, the jet won't make it to the airport. With 152 people on board, Flight 38 is falling toward London with only seconds until it hits the ground.
This can't be happening. This is one of the most modern jets in the world.
In the cabin, there's no indication that anything's gone wrong.
On approach to land, everybody seemed relaxed in the cabin. We were just looking forward to landing.
Airspeed low, airspeed low, airspeed low.
And now I was looking at our impact point. I could see a set of buildings around the Hatton Cross area and a petrol station. I just knew if we were hitting those, then it was certain 100% fatalities. At that point, I felt the weight of my 4 bars on my shoulder. I am the captain. If I don't do anything, then everybody will die.
This close to the ground, Burkill doesn't have many options. He could take back control of the plane from Coward, but doesn't think that's the right move.
First decision really was to not take control. I remember looking over at John. He was still flying the plane well. Good, he's doing a good job. He's doing what I need him to do.
Burkill knows that even if they manage to clear Hounslow, the jet could still smash into the busy A30 motorway or the antennas at the edge of the airport.
I thought about raising the gear. That's the biggest drag on a commercial jet. But I needed the gear to crash on. We were going to impact, and that was going to take the brunt of the impact, so I had to leave the gear down.
With a crash imminent, Burkill has only one move left, but it comes with enormous risk.
I knew I had about 15 seconds to make a huge decision. I needed to get past those buildings. It was obvious to me that I needed to raise the flaps.
Retracting the flaps will reduce drag, but also lift. The plane will fly further, but drop faster. Burkill must determine which is more important.
I wanted to discuss it with the crew, but this was all in a matter of seconds. I remember holding that lever for a fraction of a second.
He hopes this move will help his plane avoid catastrophe.
The effect was immediate.
Now Burkill makes the announcement every pilot dreads.
Mayday! Mayday! Speedbird! Speedbird!
It was hard, very hard. I remember the couple of impacts and the noise.
Good God!
The landing was hard. Just a huge bang. The noise, bits falling off the ceiling.
Then I also became a passenger because we were now in an uncontrolled aeroplane. We were sliding along the ground and I didn't know what we were going to hit next. And then I thought about my wife and kids and I said goodbye to them.
The lights went out.
I could hear the wreckage breaking up. And then we stopped. When we actually stopped, I was surprised that I was still there. And then I looked around the flight deck and I was more surprised to see that all 3 of us were unscarred.
Everybody stay seated with your seatbelts fastened!
And I quickly became the captain again.
The crew switches off the fuel,
APU fire switch.
hydraulic and electrical systems.
Control switches. Cut. Checklist complete.
I then had to look after my survivors. I thought 20% were dead because this aircraft was broken up.
This is an emergency. Evacuate! Evacuate!
The air stewardess then took control completely. And as she opened the door, I smelt the fuel.
We should hurry.
And realized that we need to get off this aircraft.
The big danger now is fire. Having survived the landing, passengers could be killed if flames sweep through the jet.
Jump! Jump!
I left all my luggage and just got myself down the slide.
Jump!
Let's get out of here.
I went through the galley and checked the right-hand aisle, and I was surprised to see nobody there.
Despite Burkill's fears, there are no casualties. Outside in the cool January air, the scale of the disaster is clear.
The right wheel had actually been ripped off during the impact. The engines were just sad. They were all ripped apart. The cowlings were ripped off, and the engines were half buried. It wasn't an aircraft anymore.
I now start to realize that we've been involved in a major accident. I saw the damage to the undercarriage and to the wing.
The plane narrowly missed the A-30 and the antennas at the foot of the runway.
It could have been total devastation. If the impact had been on anything other than soft mud and grass, the likelihood of a fire was immense.
Given the amount of damage, it's incredible that only 47 people were injured.
I felt quite lucky that I was still alive. It was quite a surreal feeling.
From China, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown praises Burkill and the crew.
I think it's right to pay tribute to the calmness and professionalism of the British Airways staff, the captain, Peter Burkill, for what he achieved in engineering a landing that protected lives.
Investigators have some early hunches about what caused the engines to fail. They also have plenty of clues, but a key piece of evidence is already missing.
Heathrow's emergency planning swung into action.
The crash of British Airways Flight 38 dominates the news. It's the most serious accident at Heathrow in 30 years.
Heathrow Airport is a very busy airport. It is the main airport in the UK, so anything that happens in Heathrow Airport immediately hits the media.
More significantly, the 777 is one of the world's most modern and reliable jets. The accident unsettles the airline industry.
The 777 is as safe as an airplane can be. It had such a superb safety record. What on earth happened? You don't like not knowing whether it might happen to the rest of your fleet.
Investigators quickly arrive on the scene. Phil Slight is the lead engineer for Britain's AAIB, the Air Accidents Investigation Branch.
When you first approach an accident site like this, the first thought you've got is, where do I start? The plane landed about 1,000 feet short of the runway. The landing gears pushed up through the wings. The nose landing gear collapsed.
Just hours after the crash, investigators interview the crew. Captain Peter Burkill has a first-hand account of what happened.
I think I wanted to talk about it because I knew of the innocence of the whole crew.
This isn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. But the engines weren't giving us any more power.
Well, it looks like we have double engine failure.
We tried to give them more power manually, but there was nothing.
Burkill explains that something had caused both of the jet's Rolls-Royce engines to roll back at the same time, robbing the aircraft of power.
Acceleration on both.
When you hear something of a double engine failure, you start looking at what's common. What could cause both engines to fail at the same time? So our first thoughts were that it may have run out of fuel.
A fuel shortage is rare, but it has happened before. In 1983, a Boeing 767 ran out of fuel flying over central Canada. A mistake in converting between metric and imperial measurements left the plane with much less fuel than the crew thought. At 26,000 feet, they lost power to both engines. The captain was able to glide the plane to a safe landing at an abandoned airbase. In the case of Flight 38, this theory is immediately questioned.
Jet fuel has a certain odor. Anyone who has worked with an aircraft will know the distinctive smell of Jet A1 fuel. There was certainly a lot of fuel leaking from the aircraft, from the ruptures to the bottom of the engines when we arrived on site.
A check of the plane's dipsticks confirms 2 of the tanks did in fact have fuel.
So we knew that there was plenty of fuel on board this aircraft to complete the flight.
There remains several other possible explanations for such a loss of power, and investigators must tackle them all. There is great confidence that the mystery can be solved, as any and every piece of evidence investigators could ever want is readily available. They have access to the pilot, the crew, and most importantly, the entire plane.
We were quite fortunate to have the amount of data that we had on this aircraft. Because the aircraft remained intact, we were able to interrogate lots of computers and also get lots of data from the recorders. Additionally, we had data external to the aircraft, such as radar data and also the radio transmissions as well.
Mark Ford retrieves the plane's flight data recorders, which promise to give investigators important clues. He has another resource, the QAR, or Quick Access Recorder. While the black boxes are in the rear of the plane, the QAR is a data recorder in the front, used mainly for diagnostics.
It does have an advantage over the flight recorder, though, in that it has a greater memory capacity and can record additional parameters over and above those available on the flight recorder. You can recover the data from a quick access recorder within a matter of minutes in some cases.
Speed, altitude, control settings, cockpit conversations. In all, the various recorders have preserved 1,400 different pieces of data, which should help the investigators close the case. But when they study the QAR, what they find is chilling.
The quick access recorder data stopped about 45 seconds prior to the accident itself. Initial thoughts were that there was an electrical problem, possibly that had affected not only the QAR, but possibly the engines as well.
The 777 is one of the latest advances to computer-assisted airplanes. Pilots don't directly control the plane. Instead, their inputs are sent to a computer. Those signals are then relayed to the engines, flaps, and other systems on the aircraft.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines.
A massive failure of the plane's information systems could explain why the engines stopped working. Perhaps the computers that control them froze. Farnborough is home to the AAIB. The flight data recorder has been sent here for analysis. An electrical problem would be recorded on this device. But interpreting the information will take some time. Time investigators don't have. There are hundreds of 777s landing every day. They need to find answers before whatever brought down Flight 38 strikes again. While they wait, authorities turn their attention to the fuel recovered from the ruined plane. A bad batch of fuel could have deprived the aircraft of power just when it needed it most.
Well, fuel can be contaminated in many different ways. It can be particle contamination, it can be biological contamination, and they can get into filters to restrict the flow.
We took several samples from various points within the fuel system. So not only from the fuel tank itself, but also from remnants within fuel lines and also within various fuel components.
We managed to trace the fuel back through the documentation to a shipment of Jet A1, which came from South Korea. And that was shipped across in a tanker to China and was then transported by pipeline to Beijing Airport. We compared it with over 1,200 other batches of fuel in the UK. And it came out to be very good.
Investigators next consider the possibility of a blockage in the fuel tanks. They discover some bizarre evidence. Several small pieces of tape are recovered, along with something else.
When we were in the fuel tanks, we did find a few small articles. One of them was a red scraper.
The items were likely left over from when the plane was built 7 years ago. But while they're peculiar, there's no indication that any of them played a role in bringing down the plane.
Obviously, it's not ideal to find anything within a fuel tank. We obviously looked to see whether this would have had an effect on the fuel flow to the engines. The items were so small, they would not have caused a restriction.
As the search for answers continues, a puzzling find surfaces. Less than 3 years before the Heathrow crash, another 777 suffered a serious mid-air problem. After taking off in Perth, Australia, a Malaysian passenger jet was climbing through 38,000 feet when suddenly the plane's autopilot pitched the nose up and climbed steeply. Calamity was only averted when the pilot took manual control of the jet.
They did manage to get it safely back to base. The investigators established that this was a computer problem.
British aviation authorities consider that the electronic brain of one of the world's most reliable jets might be faulty.
The Malaysian Airlines aircraft was really quite an unnerving one. The investigators sort of pulled out the files on it and started looking over it to try and get some clues.
Did we have a problem with the electronic control system causing the engines to roll back?
If flaws are found with Flight 38's computers, it means 777s around the world could all be disasters in the making. This thought hangs heavily over the industry. When the readout of the plane's flight data recorder is conducted in Farnborough, investigators learn that the crash could have been much worse.
There was very little they could actually have done.
It looks like we have double engine failure.
There was only 30 seconds between when they were fully aware of what was going on.
Airspeed low.
And the accident was inevitable.
Records show that soon after the engines failed, the plane started falling faster than 1,800 feet a minute, a very steep descent. But lack of power was only one factor working against the crew. They had extended their flaps on descent. It helps control the plane at lower speeds by increasing lift, but the extended flaps create drag, which slows the plane down. It takes more power to keep the plane flying with a wider wing.
Airspeed low.
I needed to raise the flaps. I knew that by raising it 1 notch to flap 25 would be the right thing to do. To reduce the drag, that's what I had to do.
And what he did here gave them a few extra feet.
Had the flaps been left at flaps 30, the aircraft would have struck the ground just before a set of ILS antennas.
The plane then would have slammed into the antennas, sustaining even more damage and increasing the chances of serious injuries. For their efforts, Burkill and his team are considered heroes.
Flying is about teamwork, and we had an outstanding team.
There is no doubt. Without the flight crew's actions, Flight 38's landing would have been a catastrophe.
Now, the recordings
As they continue examining data from the flight data recorders,
continue right until the moment of impact.
investigators are no closer to solving the case.
Analysis of the flight recorder didn't identify any particular fault with the aircraft electrical system that would have resulted in both engines rolling back.
They are at least able to determine why no data was found on the quick access recorder for the last 45 seconds of the flight. It's not an electrical fault as they first feared.
The 45-second delay in the QAR recording was a result of the fact that the QAR doesn't record in real time. It buffers the data and then will record approximately 45 seconds later.
With all the information from the plane's various data recorders now collected, investigators have a precise picture of what happened. The jet was on the proper course as it made its approach to land when things went horribly wrong.
At 720 feet, the right engine rolled back. 7 seconds later, the left engine rolled back. The autothrottle attempted to command greater thrust.
It's not me, that's the autothrottle.
But the engines didn't respond.
I can't get power on the engines.
While electrical and computer problems are ruled out as causes of the crash, The flight data recorders do point investigators to the likely source of the problem.
The two most significant parameters from the quick exit recorder were the fuel metering valves. Both those valves indicated that they had opened to their fully open position.
The plane's computers were calling for as much fuel from the tanks as possible. The valves were fully open, but not nearly enough fuel was reaching the engines. A plane with plenty of fuel and a working computer system still crash-landed, and investigators can't determine why. They focus on the weather on the day of the accident.
It was a very cold air mass over Siberia, so we were aware of the cold conditions, but the flight was expected to be smooth and also quick.
The plane's path took them high over Russia. The outside temperature went as low as -74 degrees centigrade. It's a potentially dangerous temperature if not monitored closely.
In cold air masses, you have to be very aware of the fuel temperatures.
When fuel starts to freeze, it produces wax. As the fuel temperature drops, the wax becomes greater within the fuel itself until it comes to a point where it can no longer flow.
We have a fuel temperature gauge on the flight deck, which is monitored at all times, and I personally look at that every time I do a fuel check, which minimum is once an hour. Basically, you don't want to get it below -34 degrees centigrade.
While they were cold, the temperatures never dipped into the danger zone where the fuel could wax and clog the system. And the fuel temperature increased significantly as the jet approached London.
We were coming through 20,000 feet, and I remember seeing -20 degrees centigrade, so it had already started to warm up.
Another potential cause of the crash is ruled out. Investigators are now running out of possible explanations.
And the expectation from the media and also from aviation experts was that we would have the answer within days.
But there was no comment today about the ongoing investigation.
It very quickly became apparent that that would not be the case.
They had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, they had everything there, except the thing that caused it. That had disappeared, as if by magic.
Despite mountains of data and physical evidence at their disposal, investigators are still unable to say what caused the crash of a British Airways 777 at Heathrow Airport. They turn to a failure of the fuel delivery system as a culprit. To prove it was responsible, they need to pinpoint anything out of the ordinary about Flight 38's journey on January the 17th, 2008.
It's a daily flight operating from Beijing to Heathrow. We wanted to work out what was unique about this flight. Why this flight in particular?
If you've got a very puzzling incident, like the 777 accident at Heathrow, you're going to mine all the data you can.
I'll just put them over there for now.
So we approached many operators to obtain some data of previous flights so that we could then do a comparison.
Flight data is collected from companies around the world.
And we had something like 144,000 flights in all.
But it will take months of work to analyze this enormous volume of information. To study Flight 38's fuel system more closely, huge sections of it are brought to the AAIB hangar and reassembled.
It allowed us to basically just sit there and look at it and to brainstorm and come up with ideas as to what might have caused it.
McDermott and his team consider all possibilities, from design flaws to a malfunction specific to this aircraft. The examination comes up empty.
We carried out an exhaustive and very thorough inspection and testing of the fuel system, and we find nothing wrong.
Frustrated, investigators are at a dead end.
We kept going through this cycle. We kept going back over what we'd done before. Had we missed something? And every time we went back over, we kept coming back to no.
There was no trouble with the plane's computers. It had plenty of fuel. And no problems with the fuel itself. But somehow, when it was most vital...
Mayday!
the engines didn't get the fuel they needed. The AAIB detectives have run out of suspects.
There was no clear explanation. Nothing that you'd seen before.
It's not giving me power.
In any airplane, let alone the 777, could have explained this.
Now they turn away from the clues they have to those they don't.
Phil started coming out of a mantra, which was a quote from Sherlock Holmes.
Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause.
Has to be.
In this case, we always kept coming back to what's there, what could have been there that's not there now. And we come back to ice.
Suspicion that the cause of the accident was ice grew stronger and stronger.
But investigators are faced with a nearly impossible task. How can they prove that ice had brought down the plane when the evidence they need would have melted by the time they arrived? 3 months after the crash, Brian McDermott flies to Seattle to work with engineers at Boeing, the company that built the 777. If ice brought down Flight 38, they need to prove how and why.
We took the pipes from the right side of the fuel system, and those pipes and those couplings were used on the test rig at Boeing.
Ice in the fuel lines has long been a concern for jets of all kinds. But decades ago, engineers found an ingenious way to deal with the ice forming in the fuel of passenger jets. The heart of the system is the fuel oil heat exchanger, or FOHE. Cold fuel runs through thin tubes, which are surrounded by the hot oil used to lubricate the engines.
The purpose of a fuel heater is to heat the fuel up to prevent icing of the delicate fuel control system.
The FOHE is designed to prevent exactly the problem investigators suspect crippled Flight 38. But it's also a potential bottleneck in the system.
During the fuel testing, we were looking to establish where we could get a restriction that would restrict the fuel flow to 6,000 pounds per hour. And the only place that we could get such a restriction occurring was on the face of the fuel oil heat exchanger.
Investigators have to prove 3 things. First, that substantial amounts of ice can accumulate inside the fuel pipes. Second, that the ice can suddenly be released. And finally, prove that it can block a device specifically designed to melt it.
We use different methods of controlling the environment around the pipes that range from dry ice to cold fuel and to hot air to simulate the environment around the pipes that the aircraft experienced during the flight.
After each fuel cooling test, investigators look inside the pipes for ice. But they can never get much ice to form, let alone block the fuel lines.
And the fuel temperature was minus 30 degrees centigrade. Very little ice would stick to the inside of the fuel pipes.
Investigators know the temperature on the accident flight didn't get much colder. So how had the ice formed?
We still hadn't answered the question of where does the ice come from in the first place? And indeed, was it ice? Or was there something else that we've missed?
Surprisingly, when the fuel temperatures are warmer, the breakthrough arrives.
If you have water in the fuel, then that water will freeze and form ice crystals. And then when the temperature gets to about minus 20 degrees centigrade, then those ice crystals will start to stick together and will also stick to the inside of the pipes.
Below minus 20, any ice crystals in the fuel are too cold to attach to the pipes. But in the sticky range, between minus 20 and minus 8 centigrade, slushy ice forms and sticks to the sides of the fuel pipes.
So when we demonstrated that ice could actually build up and grow onto the walls of the fuel pipes, there was a certain amount of surprise as to how much could actually grow.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Well, the question for us at this stage was, how could that ice come off the pipes?
Investigators think they have the smoking gun. But they still can't prove how a small bit of ice could bring down a $200 million plane. They continue analyzing thousands of comparative flights to see what made Flight 38 unique. But after 7 months, they still can't crack the case.
From 35,000 Rolls-Royce powered flights, it was less than 1% that had the same features as the accident flight.
Then, on November the 26th, 2008, more than 10 months after the crash, the importance of finding an answer is underscored when the elusive culprit strikes again. Another 777 runs into trouble 39,000 feet above the United States, when one of its engines simply stops working.
Fortunately, in that case, the engine recovered and the aircraft landed safely at Atlanta.
Even though it didn't result in an accident, it reinforces concerns that there's a potentially dangerous flaw on every 777 around the world. The incident captures the attention of the British Airways crash investigators.
The Delta Shanghai flight really was investigated with huge interest. The engines were Rolls-Royce engines of the same type. So they immediately went looking for evidence of the same problem.
And in fact, they do find important similarities between the Delta airliner and British Airways Flight 38.
The aircraft had operated a long sector from Shanghai in China to Atlanta. The fuel temperatures were within the sticky range that we had defined during the research. We were able to see that the reaction of the engine was very similar to that of the 777 at Heathrow.
Later examination of the Delta flight shows no evidence of any electronic, mechanical, or fuel system problems, strongly suggesting that the culprit was indeed ice.
When we heard about the Delta flight, we were more convinced than ever that we were on the right track.
McDermott and the investigators at Boeing in Seattle continue their testing. It's been a year since the accident, and the problem hasn't been found or fixed. They've run hundreds of simulations and spent millions of dollars. They still can't get the ice in the fuel lines to clog the fuel oil heat exchanger and cause the kind of blockage that brought down Flight 38.
We came to a stage where we had not actually come up with what had caused this accident. At this time, the media and also the general public, there was a bit of unrest as to why we had not yet come up with an answer.
Industry pressure to resolve this case is intensifying. Investigators still need to know what made Flight 38 different from thousands of others that had flown under similar conditions. To find out, they retrace every moment of Flight 38's journey. The voyage from Beijing involved a gradual climb, a steady cruise, and a gradual descent. The fuel temperatures fell and rose accordingly, causing ice to accumulate in the fuel lines. That ice posed no danger unless it was released. Now investigators study the fuel flow and find that it was kept steady for most of the flight. The autopilot maintained constant speed and low power for hours, never demanding an abrupt increase in engine power until just before they reached the runway.
The approach into Heathrow was quite a turbulent approach, and the engines were demanding various levels of thrust power.
It's not me, that's the auto throttles doing their thing.
And there were 4 changes in fuel flow, one of which was a very high fuel flow of around about 12,000 to 13,000 pounds per hour demanded.
A closer review of the American Delta flight reveals that its engine rolled back under the same circumstances, a sudden demand for power after a long period of consistent speed. Investigators are now set to duplicate these precise conditions. They hope that by reproducing the moments just before landing, which was the only part of the flight where the crew suddenly required more power, they may finally get the answer they're looking for.
The problem that we were looking at is very, very difficult to replicate. And during what was one of the last tests, we actually managed to get all the elements together.
After simulating running engines at constant speed, investigators increased the power.
We allowed the ice to accumulate for 3 hours. and then the flow rate was increased.
What happens next breaks the case wide open. In Boeing's Seattle lab, investigators' sudden demand for more engine power causes the fuel pressure downstream of the fuel oil heat exchanger to drop dramatically. And when investigators examine this vital component,
we then saw that ice had formed across the face of it.
soft ice that had formed deep inside the fuel lines broke free when the pressure was abruptly increased. It restricted the flow of fuel to the engines. Investigators have finally found the Achilles heel hidden deep inside the 777. The tubes that bring the fuel through the FOHE jut out just above the container of hot oil. It's just a few millimeters, but was enough to prevent the ice from coming in contact with the hot surface below and melting.
Now, the ice doesn't totally restrict the fuel flowing through it. It has some porosity, so the fuel will continue to flow through. But the flow rate is much lower than it should be.
In all of the tests, only one gave investigators the result they were looking for, the one that exactly matched the journey of Flight 38. While the plane flew over Russia, water in the fuel turned to ice. At -20, it began to build up along the inside of the pipes. The steady speed of the aircraft ensured this accumulation was never interrupted. Then, as the plane approached Heathrow, turbulence resulted in the first demand for power since much earlier in the flight, and things cascaded into a serious problem.
You might want to keep the autopilot on longer than usual.
The gushing fuel washed the ice through the fuel system until it built up against the face of the FOHE, with disastrous results.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines. It's not giving me power.
Facing a threat no one knew existed,
Mayday! Speedbird!
the pilots didn't have a chance to solve the problem. But why had the American Delta crew been able to clear the blockage, while the British Airways flight ended in near catastrophe? It's discovered that after just a few seconds of reducing engine power to idle, the blockage in the FOHE clears. But this maneuver was not available to the British Airways pilots because they were so close to the ground. Soon after the Seattle tests, Rolls-Royce redesigned the fuel oil heat exchanger.
So what Rolls-Royce did was to actually remove those protruding tubes, so you now have a flush face.
And they found that if they flattened this surface, even if ice crystals did form in the fuel, they'd go straight down the holes in the block. Very, very easy fix.
Other aircraft manufacturers are ordered to ensure that their systems aren't vulnerable to the same problem. Peter Burkill, John Coward, and the rest of the crew of Flight 38 received the British Airways Safety Medal for their performance during the accident. It's the company's highest honor.
Crew have been presented with an unprecedented failure, and they did the best they could in the time that they had available.
The crew did as good a job as they could, and since they really only had about 30 seconds to think about what they were going to do about this, they couldn't have done any better than they did.
The ice that brought down one of the world's most sophisticated airplanes was gone by the time investigators showed up.
Weird thing about this investigation was that the culprit had fled the scene.
The inquiry into what happened consumed thousands of hours of manpower and cost millions of dollars.
These people really pulled out the stops to find out. And the reason? We have to know.
With unrelenting diligence and a little inspiration from Sherlock Holmes, the mystery was finally solved.
Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I hope you had a good...
Captain Stefan Rasmussen has been in love with flying all of his life.
I got my first idea of flying when I was a young boy.
After learning to fly in the Air Force, Rasmussen joined Scandinavian Airlines.
He seemed to be the one who really enjoyed his job.
On December the 27th, 1991, he's in command of a state-of-the-art DC-9. The flight will take him to the very edge of his abilities as his engines fail and his plane falls out of the sky.
I was in a nightmare.
Stockholm, Scandinavian 751, we are crashing into the ground now.
What caused the most baffling accident in Sweden's history is nothing investigators could have imagined. What they finally uncover will strain Rasmussen's lifelong relationship with airplanes to the breaking point.
I really felt that I didn't trust the aircraft.
Mayday, Mayday.
It's 2 days after Christmas. Stockholm Arlanda Airport is a mess of snow, slush, and ice. Passengers boarding a mid-morning Scandinavian Airlines flight to Copenhagen are finding the cabin very uncomfortable.
It was really warm inside the plane when we entered because there had been heaters on during night. And I saw when the passengers embarked, they also wanted to take off jackets and shoes, and because it was like a sauna.
Is it possible to turn the heat down now?
"34-year-old Ulf Sedermark has been with the airline for 4 years. He's the first officer on today's flight.
It was a light snowfall. Temperature was just below freezing and light winds. We were going to fly Stockholm to Copenhagen and then to Warsaw, back to Copenhagen and down to Barcelona that day. It would be quite a long working day.
Stefan Rasmussen has just finished an exterior check of the plane. The Danish pilot is in command this morning.
In those over 12, almost 13,000 hours I've been sitting in an aircraft, I always felt that I put the aircraft and back on like a rucksack. And when we took lift on the wings, we melted together.
The plane Rasmussen is strapping on today is a nearly new DC-9, easily identifiable by its 2 rear engines.
By now, everyone should know that door stays open.
Great.
Even in the days before terrorist threats, flying with the cockpit door open is unusual. It's just one way Rasmussen has endeared himself to the crews and passengers he flies with.
I always had my cabin door open because I found out that if we had the door open and they could see that there were a human being in there, they'd trust you.
For me, it felt good that the door was open. It just feels like you have a connection more than if the door is closed.
The winter weather has delayed this flight, but Rasmussen won't compromise safety for schedule.
Where are we now with the de-icing?
The wings aren't quite done. They've done the underside. Now they're doing the top.
Thank you.
Under Captain Rasmussen's instructions, the ground crew had already de-iced the plane once. Now they're giving it another pass.
And it took a while, but they had trouble getting rid of the snow on top of the wing. So we were slightly late for our pushback out to our runway.
For Captain Per Holmberg, this kind of delay is routine business. He flies DC-9s for the airline. A passenger this morning, he is scheduled to command another flight later that day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I hope you had a good Christmas. We're just getting our wings cleared as we've had a bit of snow overnight. And when that's finished, we're ready for takeoff for some warmer weather. I handpicked the airline's best cabin crew to take care of you today. We all hope you have a nice flight.
Finally, Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 is cleared to proceed. There are build-ups of snow that the crew must avoid on the way to the runway.
Would have been nice of them to clear the snow.
Oh, that would have made it too easy. Approaching holding point, runway 08.
Roger, Scandinavian 751. You are cleared for takeoff from runway 08.
Spoilers?
Armed.
Auto brake, takeoff and armed. Runway update performed. Checklist completed.
Set power.
Despite the winter conditions, the takeoff is routine.
V1, rotate.
Gear up.
Gear up selected.
When Wolfie reached out for the gear, I heard things which was different.
Just 25 seconds into the flight, as the plane is climbing, there is a problem.
When you hear things that are different from the normally, you get suspicious. There was a really big roar in the aircraft, almost like an explosion. Boom!
There was another banging noise that I just thought, what is that? I had never heard that before.
It's obvious the source of the noise is the right engine.
Sounds serious. I believe it's a compressor stall.
I took the right throttle and moved a little back, but there it really became strange because the engine performance increased when I reduced the throttle. It's like if you're sitting in your car and you're turning your wheel to the left and the car is driving to the right, you get confused.
We're not supposed to like call into cockpit now. And then I thought, this is an emergency, I have to call the captain.
But Captain Rasmussen doesn't respond to the call. He's too busy trying to figure out what's going wrong with his plane.
I couldn't see anything on the instrument. They were quite stable and they're quite normal range, no problem. But I could hear those roaring every second.
He searches for telltale signs of attack or structural failure.
And I looked up at the cabin pressure, because if you have a bomb or a freight door or anything which is ripped off, that'll give a decompression.
In the cabin, pressure levels are stable. But the crew has other concerns.
I saw the smoke and it smelled burnt.
What should we do about this?
Just 3,200 feet above the ground, the emergency escalates. The right engine quits.
When we have flown a little over 1 minute, the right engine just went down. I had a very, very short moment of thinking that I was in a nightmare and just dreaming. I was confused. I was really confused.
2 seconds later, the left engine also quits. The plane is now powerless.
One engine drop and then another engine drop. I thought that it wasn't true. It wasn't true. It wasn't real.
Less than a minute and a half after takeoff, the DC-9 begins falling from the sky.
And after that, it was complete silence. And I think that was the worst moment for me. Just being in the air, and it's so quiet. It was like a bird just sailing through the sky. So then I started to get scared.
Engine relay.
As the pilots try to restart their engines, things get even worse. The left engine erupts in flames.
I saw the exhaust gas temperature was rising rapidly. The max temperature was around 680 degrees Celsius, and I saw it go above 800.
A fire in the engine could spread to the rest of the plane.
Should I pull?
If Sedermark pulls the fire extinguisher in the left engine, he will never be able to restart it. He pulls the handle to put out the fire. From his seat, Captain Per Holmberg can see that the crew is in trouble. Flight 751 is now falling at a rate of 1,200 feet per minute. But air traffic controllers at the Stockholm airport have no idea the plane is in trouble.
Arlanda, Stockholm, Scandinavian 751.
Good morning, SK 751. Climb to flight level 180. We have problems with our engines, please.
We need to go back to Arlanda.
751, roger. Turn right, heading to here.
Suddenly, the radio goes dead. A result of the failed engines. Only the right engine can provide power, but it's now spinning too slowly to generate electricity for the instruments.
Without the engine, you don't have any propulsion, so the only energy you have is your height.
With time running out, the pilots of Flight 751 must find a way to restart the right engine, or else crash into the countryside below. Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 is now falling from the sky at 20 feet per second.
How can I help?
Captain Per Holmberg, who boarded the flight as a passenger, becomes part of the flight crew.
He came out in the cockpit and he said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" I don't think I even said yes. I just said, "Start the APU."
If the auxiliary power unit can be launched, it will bring back the radio and instruments.
So I just handed him the emergency checklist and started focus on controlling the flight to see that we were maintaining the speed and the attitude and that we were wings level. He managed to start the auxiliary power unit, so my flight instruments were supplied from that.
But for some reason, Captain Rasmussen's instruments don't come back online.
He managed to fly the plane basically by feel.
Power is also restored to the cabin, but it's small comfort to passengers who now know they're in extreme danger. Stockholm Air Traffic Control instructs the pilots to return to the airport.
Scandinavian 751, are you able to turn right, heading 090, radar vectoring for 0-1?
But the plane is now just 1,600 feet from the ground. And First Officer Sedermark's attempts to resuscitate it aren't working.
Roger, we are maintaining our heading, but we are trying to restart our engines.
Making a 180-degree turn back to Stockholm could be catastrophic.
I really had the feeling that if I turned the aircraft at that time, we would have stalled.
When you're turning back, you are losing a lot of energy. So the most safe thing to do is actually just to go straight, keep your wings level. That means that you will use less energy of your altitude, so you can maintain your speed.
You can maintain 2,000 feet.
We are not able to maintain 2,000 feet. We are descending. We are at 1,600 feet and descending.
Holmberg wants Rasmussen to focus his attention on finding a landing spot.
Look straight ahead. Look straight ahead.
He was screaming at Stefan, just look straight ahead and watch the flight path.
Prepare for on-ground emergency.
On-ground emergency!
Bend down! Bend down! Bend down!
So we shouted bend down, I don't know how many times. Bend down, bend down, bend down.
Keep your seatbelts fastened.
While passengers brace, Rasmussen considers where to land his plane.
Look straight ahead.
And I had an idea that on the northern direction could bring us out to the Baltic Sea, which was at that time frozen. And that's an excellent runway.
But instead, he finds himself gliding powerlessly over a dense forest.
I saw that green area and I saw that little light spot in the middle of the forest, but that really looked short.
Steer right, steer right.
Just 500 feet above the ground, Captain Rasmussen lifts the plane's nose to slow it down, hoping to soften the crash landing.
Pine trees from the top there look very soft. I could use the trees as almost like a pillow.
Should I lower the landing gear?
Yes, gear down.
Bend down and hold your knees.
I prepared myself for a hard impact. If it's an emergency landing, we have no engines, I just thought this is going to be a hard landing.
Stockholm, Scandinavian 751, we are crashing into the ground now.
I wasn't afraid until we were flying into the trees. Then I was scared, and I knew we were not going to make it.
I didn't thought I should die. I knew I should die. I made my prayer to God. And then a moment after, we were in a strange world.
After we have come to a complete stop, I feel the smell of airplane fuel. I thought, okay, we're gonna explode. And I look around and I see the snow because there was a big crack in the airplane fuselage just in front of the aft galley. And you could just walk down on the ground.
Everything was quiet, and I woke up. It might only have been a split second or so.
I was afraid that my spine was broken, that I wouldn't be able to walk again. So I remember I was sitting there and I was moving my toes and my feet just to see if I could have control over them. I had a pain in my hand because I had broken a bone in my hand, and I was bleeding heavily from my forehead, so I was trying to get clear of all the blood that was coming down in my eyes. And Stefan told me that we had to get out of the aircraft.
After plowing through 125 meters of pine forest, the pilot's fear is now that the broken aircraft could catch fire. Dozens of passengers escape through the breaks in the fuselage walls. But Captain Per Holmberg has been knocked unconscious by the crash.
It all went so fast that no one could take in what happened. So I tried to stay with the group of passengers I had there. But I just knew the feeling also that we had to wait a long time for the rescue teams.
Help will be here soon.
Fortunately, no fire materializes. But because they removed their winter clothing while boarding the sweltering plane, many passengers are starting to freeze.
Most people were just standing in their shirts, t-shirts, very, very little clothes. Few didn't even have shoes on.
They are now at risk from hypothermia.
So I focused on being caring. Maybe I did it for my own sake also. I needed a hug also. It was comforting to comfort someone else.
The wreckage of Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 lies just 15 kilometers northeast of Stockholm Arlanda Airport. The fuselage has broken into 3 pieces. In the chaos of the moment, nobody knows how many people have been killed in the crash. Rescuers arrive within minutes and attend to the freezing survivors. They pull Captain Per Holmberg from the cabin, unconscious.
He landed on the wall at impact, and he skidded down on the wall to the floor at impact. So he was quite badly damaged. He cut his eyelid, and he also got his collarbone that was broken off, so his shoulder was in front of him.
92 of the passengers have sustained injuries. Only 8 are considered serious. But when the crew conducts a head count, they're stunned to learn that out of the 129 people who boarded Flight 751, not a single one was killed in the crash.
Everyone survived. It was like a shock just to take in. Wow, that was a fantastic comment.
This was the happiest captain in the world. We were all alive. It was a great moment.
Reporters break the remarkable story to the world. As the Swedish Accident Investigation Board, or SAIB, takes charge of the case. Scandinavian Airlines alerts its own investigators, dispatching Tori Hultgren to head up its team.
It's most unusual that the plane crashes in a wooded area and everybody survives. I've never heard of it before. The police kept everybody off the site itself. There was a cordon around the aircraft about 100 meters. We had a complete aircraft, nothing had burned, and we had lots of good data.
Henrik Ullander from the SAIB gets to work on the evidence.
And we all started to plan the documentation of the accident site, which means photographing all the final approach through the wood, you know, and to take photos of all the parts that were spread all over the place.
The 2 black boxes, which record cockpit conversations and store flight data, are recovered immediately. Investigators speak to survivors. Everyone tells a similar story.
Would you mind telling me what you saw and heard?
Loud booming sounds from the engines moments after the flight began, smoke in the cabin, and finally the entire loss of power and an engine on fire.
You have a twin-engine aircraft, and you are really not supposed to lose both engines at the same time.
The Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines are sent to a Scandinavian Airlines repair shop for closer examination. Investigators are eager to speak with Captain Rasmussen about the incident. But to their dismay, Scandinavian Airlines takes him to the media first.
The first question, what did you think when both engines refused to function? It'll take me an awful long time to tell you all that.
The normal case is that the key witnesses, like the crew and so on, should be kept in quarantine until they meet the investigation board.
European media celebrate Captain Stefan Rasmussen as a hero for landing the DC-9 without engine power. But investigators consider the possibility that he or his co-pilot had made errors that caused the crisis in the first place.
The honor and the glory always rests with the captain, but so does also the mishaps.
I knew that being a person in the spotlight of the press would be a quite different situation. And I said to myself, the only thing you can do now is to give them all their story and then pray that they will find the reason.
Lars Lindberg is an investigative representative for the Swedish Airlines Pilot Association. He examines the wreckage for signs of mechanical or structural failure.
We knew both engines had failed for some reason,
So we was concerned what was the background for something like that to happen. The first time I saw the engines in the workshop, I was surprised.
Is this all they found?
There was a number of parts that were completely missing, and this was something we hadn't seen before to this extent.
To find out what happened, investigators must find the missing pieces, which now lies somewhere in snow-covered fields and forests. A close study of Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751's engines reveals exactly which pieces are missing.
Parts of this aircraft was shedding parts from both engines. And then what you do is you go further in and you document everything and you try to find the root cause and see how it all comes together.
The missing pieces could hold the key to discovering why both of the plane's engines quit within seconds of each other. But they could be anywhere along the 15-kilometer route the aircraft covered during its short flight. They must be found. Investigators use the flight data recorder to map the plane's journey and determine where engine parts may have fallen. After scouring the snow-covered fields along the plane's path, the recovery team finds 500 fragments. Just a fraction of what's missing. Many are very badly damaged. Some of the titanium blades actually seem to have been on fire.
You had this titanium fire inside both engines, both the right and the left engine. And this titanium fire is a very unique occurrence. It's requiring very, very high pressure and very high temperature for a titanium blade to catch fire.
Investigators dig deeper into the cause of the engine trouble. The left engine's fuel line is badly dented. It was obviously hit by a fast-moving piece of metal inside the engine. The impact caused it to rupture.
This part got dislodged, it went out and hit a fuel line, and that fuel line cracked, sprayed fuel onto the hot engine.
The engine was clearly coming apart during the flight.
That sounds serious.
The discovery explains the fire in the left engine and why so many pieces of it were found so far from the crash site. But investigators are left wondering why the engines broke up in the first place. A major clue comes from passenger and crew testimonies, which told of repeated booming noises before the left engine caught fire. The cockpit voice recorder picked up these sounds.
You can hear that, and we could correlate that with when the damage occurred. You can see that on the flight data recorder.
The sounds are familiar to investigators and leave no doubt. The DC-9's engines began surging shortly after takeoff. Jet engines rely on a steady stream of air for combustion. A series of fans move incoming air through various stages of compression. But when that flow is disrupted, fuel at the rear of the engines ignites violently and shoots forward.
That's a surge. You can have a small surge and you can have a large surge. And you can have the complete surge on the whole engine.
Sounds serious.
This surge process was very violent, so after a very short time, we had an aircraft with two engines that could not be restarted, that didn't generate any thrust. Basically, you had a giant glider at that point.
A closer look at the fan blades from the front of the engines explains why they were surging. They're badly dented. The damage would have prevented them from effectively directing air to the rear of the engines.
This damage that twisted the fan blade started this process. You got this disturbed air in the fan, you got this rotating fan stall that then triggered this whole breakdown, the compressor surge, and then the whole process that led up to the dual engine failures.
But what exactly mangled the blades? There are ways to tell.
If it comes from a stone, rubber, ice and so on. You can see it on the shape of the damage. The ice causes very specific damages. It's sort of like a soft dent.
Analysis of dent patterns on the fan blades is conclusive. They were struck by ice. Now investigators want to find out where the ice could have come from.
Weather data for the 24 hours leading up to the crash.
They know Stockholm had been hit with rain and snow in the hours before Flight 751 took off.
It was a situation with the temperature around 0 degrees. It was a drizzle, snow, rain in the morning.
They learned that the DC-9 arrived from Zurich the night before, with the fuel tanks more than half full.
They had quite a large amount of reserve fuel, of diversion fuel, in their wings. The fuel in the wing tanks were close to minus 20 degrees Celsius.
The conditions that night were ideal for the formation of clear ice on the wing surface.
And here you had very, very cold fuel on the top wing skin. And as the temperature dropped during the night, it went to snow and rain, and finally snow. So there was a layer cake. Ice at the bottom, slush, and snow on top. About 10 inches total on top of the wings in the morning.
Responsibility for de-icing the plane ultimately falls on the captain. Rasmussen insists he was aware of the overnight buildup. Investigators wonder if the pilot did all he could to ensure his plane was completely free of ice. Rasmussen claims he instructed technicians to de-ice the plane thoroughly.
I didn't walk around with the aircraft. It was cold, it was frosty.
Noticing that there was still frost on the wings, the head technician ordered a second round of de-icing.
I was really convinced that the aircraft was clean. And so was he,
Where are we now with the de-icing? The wings aren't quite done. They've done the underside.
The cockpit voice recorder backs up Rasmussen's testimony.
They've got it good and clean under the wings? Yes, yes.
They de-iced the aircraft once and looked at it and I said, once more. And they de-iced us the second time.
In fact, a total of 850 liters of fluid was sprayed on the aircraft. But the fluid may have been faulty, not potent enough to melt the thick layer of ice that had accumulated on the wings overnight. Technicians test samples of the fluid used to de-ice Flight 751.
We found no discrepancies. There was nothing wrong with any of the fluids used.
But when investigators interview the maintenance crew that worked on the plane, they begin wondering if the de-icing team was thorough enough in their efforts. The ground crew insists that after they sprayed the wing, it appeared to be clean. But that appearance was deceptive.
It looked perfect, because the clear ice on top of the fuel tanks, you cannot see the clear ice.
A technician inspected the front of the wing and found no ice. He couldn't have known that there was ice further back, out of his reach.
No provisions for stairs or anything that he could use to get up on the wing at the de-icing platform. It looked shiny and nice, couldn't see any ice on it, but still there was maybe an inch of ice on top of the wing when the aircraft took off.
As soon as the plane took flight, the ice became a problem.
On this aircraft, the engines are positioned behind the wings, and as the aircraft rotated and the wings bent in order to take the weight of the aircraft, this ice in the wing roots loosened and it sucked right into the engine.
The ice damaged the fan blades at the front of the engines and ultimately caused them to begin surging.
Nobody really expected that this would happen, or could happen, but it did.
When ice breaks off the wings during flight, it doesn't pose a problem for most aircraft. But the placement of a DC-9's engines leaves them more susceptible to being struck. The Pratt & Whitney engines on Flight 751 were designed to withstand this type of ice ingestion. Something else must explain the disaster. Investigators know that the wrong reaction by a pilot can make surges worse. They comb through the flight data to see what these pilots did when the emergency struck.
The first thing you do when you have a surge, if you recognize it as a surge, is that you reduce power.
Captain Rasmussen claims he did just that.
Of course, you just pull the throttle back, and then you have the balance between the incoming fuel and incoming air. And that was actually what I did.
But the flight data recorder tells a different story.
Why is the engine power increasing?
It clearly shows that in the moments after the surge, thrust was reduced, but then seconds later was increased to beyond full power.
Yeah, it didn't add up because the RPM was increasing to 110%, and the throttle position was moving. It shouldn't be. The only thing that could move the throttles in clamp was the pilot's hand.
But if Rasmussen didn't push the throttles forward, something else did. It would explain the captain's confusion as his engines began to surge.
As a pilot, when you've gone through the training, you've done all your emergency training, you've been through the simulator, and now you have a system that is doing something that you don't expect, it's very confusing.
Despite their relentless efforts, investigators can find no possible explanation for the increase in thrust.
The frustrating part with the investigation was that we could not figure out why the system did what it did.
Then, almost 2 months after the accident, the plane's manufacturer provides the answer. The culprit is something called automatic thrust restoration.
It's brand new. It automatically increases the thrust during the climb.
Swedish authorities learned that automatic thrust restoration, or ATR, was recently introduced as a safety feature on Scandinavian Airlines planes. It existed because the FAA had discovered some pilots were throttling back considerably while taking off and landing to reduce noise over residential neighborhoods. The ATR was designed to make it impossible for them to throttle back to dangerous levels.
So as soon as he powered back, the system kicked in.
Investigators learned that when Rasmussen reduced power to clear his engine surge, the system read this as a dangerously low power setting and pushed the throttles forward. The increased thrust made the surging worse until the engines destroyed themselves. The investigation concludes that the pilots had taken the right steps to clear the surge and prevent the catastrophe. But the computer code which governs the ATR undermined their efforts.
A strip of zeros and ones caused the throttles to move and caused the engines that were stalling because they already got too much fuel, got even more fuel. And they went into self-destruct, both engines. In a few seconds, they were both totally destroyed.
The system was so new to Scandinavian Airlines that nobody there had even heard of it.
And it was confusing for everyone because we didn't know about the system, we didn't have information on the system. SAS didn't know the system existed on their aircraft.
We hadn't bought that modification. And it was sneaked in via another system.
Because he didn't know about the ATR, Rasmussen was unaware that he could only save his plane by switching it off. News that the automatic thrust restoration was responsible for the accident proved both a blessing and a curse for Captain Rasmussen. It eliminated any notion that he had made a mistake.
When I got that message, I was really released. It was like winning in a lottery. It was, because I was so happy. Because then I could explain why I was in that total cone of confusion.
But the fallout would ultimately destroy a love affair and end a career. On October the 20th, 1993, the Swedish Accident Investigation Board releases its report on the crash of Flight 751. It determines that the actions of Captain Rasmussen and First Officer Sedermark contributed to the safe outcome of this incident. And although investigators question Captain Per Holmberg's decision to enter the cockpit in the first place, they do praise his contribution.
This crew flew until they stood still on the ground. They never gave up. They never gave up. They didn't give an inch.
The investigators put much of the blame for the accident on Scandinavian Airlines because their procedures for checking for clear ice were inadequate.
I believe it's a compressor stall.
The report also condemns the fact that the pilots didn't know about the automatic thrust restoration and how it would act in a surge situation.
If the ATR system hadn't been there, if the trolls hadn't moved forward, there wouldn't have been an accident.
It was a bit strange that we didn't have all the documentation available to us, so we knew what we could expect if something like this would happen.
In the wake of the crash, Scandinavian Airlines started training its pilots how to use the ATR system. They also implemented steps to ensure airplanes don't take off with clear ice on the wings.
We changed all the procedures, we provided stairs for the mechanic, and we made it a requirement to go up on top of the wing and touch it with your hand to verify after de-icing.
After healing from his injuries, First Officer Ulf Sedermark returned to the cockpit.
I didn't feel the responsibility that I wouldn't be able to do my job again. Whatever happens, I know that I still can see things for what they are. And I still love doing my job, and if something bad happens, I can deal with it.
But Stefan Rasmussen's return proved far more difficult.
Set power.
After I'd had from a high-skilled psychologist, we talked about getting in the air again. He knew that that would be a hard decision to take.
Gear up. Fire drill.
After time in the simulator, Rasmussen couldn't regain confidence in his plane.
Sorry, guys.
In a disaster situation, in a crisis, is that you have optimized the teamwork between man and machine. I really felt that I didn't trust the aircraft.
Pilots tend to take the responsibility for all that went wrong. Too much of the glory and also too much of the responsibility.
With the right counseling, about 90% of pilots involved in an accident are able to continue flying. Even though Captain Rasmussen received treatment, his career ended with the crash of Flight 751.
Taking that decision to leave aviation as pilot was like having your highest love and come to that conclusion that you have to kill her. I had many hours, many missions of happiness in an aircraft. And I loved my passengers, I loved my aircraft so much, so I said, that's it. I never regretted, never. And I think I was right.